Hey mama, if you're listening to this, you might be carrying a secret that feels too heavy to speak out loud. You look like you got it all together, you serve at church, maybe you even lead a Bible study. You smile when you drop off the kids, but no one sees the other side of you, the one that comes out behind closed doors. At home, you are a completely different person. You yell, you explode, you scream at your kids, sometimes in their face. You tell them to shut up. You grab them too harshly. You throw things across the room. You smack them in anger, twist their ears, spank them in rage, and immediately after, you are hit with a tidal wave of shame. You cry alone in your room and you whisper, "God, what is wrong with me?" You feel scared and disgusted by your own reactions. You're terrified that someone might find out. You wonder if your kids would be better off without you. You feel unworthy, broken, and too far gone to be redeemed. You try to fix this on your own. You listen to podcasts, parenting books, download freebies, but nothing changes. You keep falling back into the same patterns, and it feels like you are stuck in a cycle that you can't break. You don't trust yourself anymore, and if you're honest, you are afraid of who you've become. But here's the truth, Mama. You are not beyond hope. You're not alone, and with God's help and the right support, you can change. I'm Elizabeth, a mom of 4 and an anger management coach for Christian moms. And inside my Calm Christian Mom coaching program, I guide women just like you through a powerful transformation. This isn't shallow behavior management. We go deep. We address your triggers, your stress, your mindset, your nervous system, and the spiritual root behind your patterns. We invite God into every layer and walk hand in hand towards healing. In just 12 weeks, you can become a completely different mom, unrecognizable. One who leads with patience, not panic. One whose children feel emotionally safe around her. One who cultivates peace. This summer, I'm offering a Calm Mama strategy session, a powerful 15-minute one-on-one coaching session designed to help you uncover the root of your anger and receive spiritual, emotional, and practical support. It's your chance to experience what coaching is like with me before diving deeper into ongoing support. If we both feel like the full program is the next right step, we can talk about what that looks like for you. You don't have to keep living like this. Your family is worth healing, and so are you. Use the link in the show notes to book the Calm Mama strategy session. Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by your emotions and wondered, why is this so hard? In this powerful episode, I sit down with Alicia Michelle, a Christian mindset coach, an author, and a podcaster, to unpack the root of emotional overwhelm and how to navigate emotions in a way that aligns with God's truth. We talk about the deeper meaning behind your emotions, how your nervous system plays a role in your reactions, and how to respond with grace instead of guilt. You'll walk away with practical tools rooted in both neuroscience and scripture. In this episode, you're going to learn what emotions really are and how to experience them without falling into sin. Why calming your nervous system is the first step to processing emotions, and 5 ways to do that starting today, as well as biblical 3-step process for managing your emotions in a healthy, God-honoring way. If you ever struggled with emotional outbursts, guilt after reacting in anger, or felt stuck in a pattern of people-pleasing, this episode is for you. Alicia gives insight into how your emotional responses like fighting, fleeing, freezing, or pleasing are connected to both your biology and your beliefs. You will learn how to calm your body, silence your inner critic, and hear God's truth louder than the lies. Let's get into this podcast interview. Welcome, Alicia, to Emotional Healthy Legacy. I am so excited to have you here.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yes. So I invited you on the podcast because you have an amazing book
Thank
called
you.
Emotional Confidence. And I want you to share with us from a biblical perspective what it means to handle emotions and how to deal with them in a God honoring way. And so before we jump into our conversation, I want you to share a little bit about your story, who
Mm.
you are, and how did you get where you are today?
That's a huge question, but let me try to boil it down. So I'm Alicia Michelle. I am an ICF certified coach. I am a podcaster. My podcast is called The Christian Mindset Coach. And as you just said, I have a book called The Emotional Confidence or just Emotional Confidence. And my passion is helping women develop the ability to build confidence in how they deal with their emotions. And that all came from my own journey and the lack of tools and ability to manage my feelings for the longest time. I grew up just kind of stuffing my feelings down, feeling like as a someone who's really driven by performance and people pleasing, perfectionism, just that like I those were inconvenient feelings were things that got in the way that didn't need to be what I should focus on because the was on the goal and getting to what needed to happen. Right. So if I felt something, it felt like an inconvenience. And I went through a lot of things as we all do through life. Finally, in about 2017, I had a medical crisis that dramatically affected the rest of my life and specifically how I dealt with my emotions and how I was working with women moving forward. So without going too much detail into that, we do go into that way more in the book. I had a vertebral artery dissection, which is the vertebral arteries are in the back of your neck, and the dissection is when the artery explodes. Or an aneurysm is when it explodes out. So a dissection is when it collapses inward. And so this horrible thing happened to me out of the blue, no reason, no medical other reasons. And I spent 9 months after that recovering and really thinking about how did I get here? Why did this happen? Learning that cortisol, the high levels of stress in my body and in my life of not dealing with all the things that were happening to me and it had happened to me through the years had really built up to this point where my body had destroyed itself in this way. It was really interesting when you start looking at some of the research behind how that can come to be. And so God gave me that second chance. He said, you will have a second chance. You will get through all of this, but you need to get to the root of why. Why are you doing this? Why do you feel like you have to push? Why do you feel like you can never rest? Why do you feel like you can't even touch those emotions at all? What is that about? And so as I began digging into that and realizing there was a lot there that I didn't really know how to do or how to feel, and realized the how my brain had been programmed for the longest time to think this is how you respond, this is what you do. I had to get to the root of all of those things first. And as I did that work, I realized that the women that I had been working with around parenting and other things, there were a lot of other women who were just like me, who were trapped in this cycle of knowing like I have feelings, but I have no idea what to do with them. And so I'm never going to touch them. And so I, through coaching and through years of working with hundreds of women, began developing different ways to do that in a practical way. How can we still be Christ followers and feel these things? That's where the ADD method came to be. It was just through after working with hundreds of people in coaching and just like, this is the pattern that's really helpful for how our brain works, how God made our brain, and how we can work with Him to manage our emotions. So after all of that, we ended up writing the book. Emotional Confidence is part of that. And that's what I love doing now is helping women through the book and also through a membership club that I have called the Emotional Confidence Club, where we practice these things in real time. So that's a little bit of the story, but I know we're going to dig more into it. I just really am passionate about helping women notice what's going on underneath and getting to the root of what's there and not shaming themselves for feeling those things, especially when I know you talk a lot about anger, not shaming themselves for feeling that anger, but understanding why it's there so that we can move forward and have practical tools to get God's help to move through
Mm-hmm.
these things.
Yes, what I really love about your book is that it's both spiritual and
Mm.
practical. There's a
Thank you.
lot of Bible verses. What does the Bible say about our emotions and processing them? And there's a lot of practical tools. And
Mm.
I have found that that's kind of a hard thing to find a lot in like Christian
Yes.
communities, oftentimes when it comes to how what we should do, it's very over spiritualized. It's like, okay, well,
Mhm.
be angry and do not sin, and have a good attitude. Well, how? Like
Yeah.
nobody teaches me like the how. What do I do in the moment when I have a negative attitude?
Yeah.
Like, how do I shift out of it? Oh, just get a better attitude. How? Like
Yes.
nobody teaches you the how.
Yes.
And or just be angry, do not sin. Okay, great. I am angry. How do I not sin? Because I just want to
Yes.
punch somebody right now. And so
Yes.
I really love that you have both things in your book. You're talking about what the Bible says, and then you're like step by step, you're saying, how do you do that practically in the moment? And like that is something that I value and so much. And I think that is so, so helpful having both pieces. So tell me, why is managing emotions so hard?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just mentioned because number one, a lot of us grew up not knowing how to deal with emotions. We weren't really shown maybe healthy ways to deal with them. No one really sat me down, at least, and said, it's okay to feel these things. Here's some ways to do that. And emotions seem to fly in the face of what we think God wants us to do, right? Like we know what, like you said, and in your anger, don't sin. So, how do I deal with this anger then? Like, there's not this, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of answers of that walk that line of how can I be a good Christian and follow Christ and still deal with what I'm feeling as a human. And I think we're also, a lot of us have been so focused on just, we can overcome these things. We can be who we want to be, that we forget that there are parts of us being human that are just difficult and hard. And we have to sit in, and God has to help us through them. And there's all these feelings and stuff around it, and we're not really shown what to do with them. So we're kind of in this place of reacting the way our body will react when it's at capacity, or it's in a survival kind of a mode where it's going to fight, it's going to flight, it's going to freeze, or it's going to fawn. It's going to do those survival reaction modes that the amygdala does. So we find ourselves stuck in these patterns of, well, I'm always going to have a cookie after, a hard day at work, or I'm always need to have a drink, or I find myself scrolling on my phone. We're reacting to the emotions, but we're doing it in a way that we haven't really identified that it's the emotion that's the issue. It's just, well, I have this behavior and I don't know why I do it. But when we peel back the layers, it really is about the underlying emotion and the difficulty we have in dealing with it. So I appreciate that you said that having practical tools is important to you, and having the science and the Bible together is important to you. That's exactly how I am too. That's the need that I feel like I fill. And I'm so happy to be able to, God keeps giving me ways to do that, because that's what I think we need. We need to be able to
Mhm.
bring them both together. And we need to stop just saying, well, just pray about it and just release it to God. Well, I know I'm praying about it. I am releasing it to God. So why can't I feel differently? We need tools, and those things, those emotions, those and the tools to deal with them can be ways to connect with God in a deeper way. I think it all works together, but we have to be willing to say that it's not just this. There has to be more than theory behind it.
Yeah, and I like how you say it. Sometimes people will just say, just pray about it. And I saw this picture, drawing analogy a while back on social media. It's somebody that's drowning and they have their hand out, like help me. And someone's standing, on the deck and they're like, just pray about it. And that's just kind of like what it seems sometimes in
Yeah.
in Christian circles. It's like I'm in this really hard, challenging situation, or
Yeah.
I'm dealing with XYZ and I have no idea how to handle it, or like deal with these big feelings and emotion. It's like, yeah, just pray about it. Or I have so much resentment and bitterness and unforgiveness
Yeah.
towards this one person that hurt me.
Yeah.
Well, just pray about it. Okay, I am praying about it. Like I have a client right now that
Yeah.
struggles with a lot of those big feelings towards her husband. And it's like, yes, we are praying about it. And here are some practical ways to
Yes.
process and release those big feelings, how to rewire your brain, how to
Mm-hmm.
choose truthful thoughts instead of believing the lies that the enemy is feeding you. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad you were able to share that. So that leads us to the next question. What are emotions and how can we experience them without sinning and
Mhm.
doing destructive things with our emotions, even like, let's talk about bitterness and resentment,
Sure.
right? Because when we're bitter and resentful towards somebody, we are not really nice to that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's start with that first part of the question, which is what are emotions? So, emotions, if we can look at them from a more simplistic framework, emotions are simply reactions that our body is having to the world around us. If we think of our five senses, sight, touch, taste, smell, all of the senses, that we're we're hearing things and our body reacts to it. If we hear a beautiful piece of music, we may cry or we might get energized and pumped up. If we see our child on the soccer field and they get a goal, we're excited. If we see a car accident, we're sad. Like, we have reactions based on what's happening in front of us. And those are God-given responses to our world. It's a sixth sense, so to speak. It's how God has wired us to be able to understand on a deeper level what is happening in our world. So if we can look at it from that neutral standpoint, that God made us to be able to experience these things, it's not that we have to label them as bad or good. We can feel them, and there's plausible reasons to feel the anger, the bitterness, all of these things. That's reasonable to feel those things. What we do with them, that's the part that we get to choose how to handle. And that's the part where we're choosing to sin or not sin with those reactions. I like to think of emotions as check engine lights. So if we're driving a car and we see a check engine light come on, it just means that this might be something to look into. Like, you might have to change your oil, you might have to rotate your tires. Sometimes when we're feeling a feeling, we have the capacity to deal with it in the moment, and we can just look at it and deal with it. But there are times when, like when you're driving, I'm like, I can't pull over right now and just go get my tires rotated. Like, okay, so sometime in the next week or two, I probably need to go look into getting that done. Right. So it's an alert. It's an alert to what's naturally happening as a response in our world. So again, if we start with that, then it becomes, we can put less heaviness on ourselves about why we're feeling the emotion. In fact, the very first step of the model that I teach for managing emotions is acknowledging, why does it make sense? It makes sense I'm feeling this way because I've had a long night. I didn't get any sleep. My kid is been doing this thing where he's not listening, or he's whatever it is, ongoing, I'm having problems with my marriage. It makes sense I'm feeling this way. Now, the part that we get to control, of course, is what we do. How do we respond to it? So that part is the continuing on through the process of discerning what's truth, what's lies, and what is the step that God wants me to take. That's inviting Jesus into it to say, maybe my natural response is to yell or to scream or to hit or do things that are what a human or any person would do. It doesn't make it right, but that's a natural response to an emotion. God, you've called me to a higher level. You don't want me to do those things. You want me to build my family, not destroy it. So what are the things that I need to do differently in this situation? God, show me what that could look like. But I think it first starts with acknowledging and understanding what the emotions are and why they're there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you for explaining that. I
Mhm.
know you talk about the fighter, the runner, the freezer, and the pleaser in your
Mhm.
book. And that is a automatic reaction to a circumstance, I would say. And so it could be, let's say, in an intense conversation with a spouse, somebody's naturally a fighter, someone's naturally a person that's like, you know what, I'm out of here. I don't want to deal with it.
Yes.
Someone's naturally a freezes in the situation. Someone naturally is a pleaser, and
Mhm.
some of it is, I believe some of it is just the way that we are wired, and some of it is like our history, our upbringing,
Yeah.
and things that played a role into that. So talk a little bit about those, the differences between those, and how that affects our relationships with other people.
Yeah, great question. I think that this is such an interesting thing to look at human behavior. There's a story in the book that it's in one of the chapters that talks about this, where we had a whole car full of me and some other friends. We were put in the exact same triggering situation at the same time, and we all had completely different responses. It was fascinating. It was scary in the moment when we were going through it, but afterwards we were like, that was crazy. So, but those four main responses are the four main responses that the amygdala does. And we can break them down. I like to think of them as different metaphors. So the fighter is like that person who's a firecracker. They hold it all in, and then all of a sudden it's just, they're blowing up, right? It's just an explosion. And each of these different personas can be different situations, different relationships, different triggers. You know, you might feel like, okay, in my marriage, I'm this, but in my parenting, I'm this, or however that is. And so
I
the
can
first,
I
go
can
ahead.
attest to that because
Yeah.
in my marriage, I can be a fighter and in parenting, but if it's in a public situation and
Yes.
somebody says something that's super like threatening and uncomfortable, I just freeze. I just like I my
Mm-hmm.
brain just goes blank and I don't know what to do.
Yes,
So,
yes. I think that's interesting too. Yeah, I can see myself in different ways in different situations. So the first one is the fighter, which is the, again, the firecracker. The second one is that runner. So the runner can be two different ways that we run. We can either cover it up, like we're masking, we're putting on a mask of everything's fine, I'm good, we're perfect, I don't have any problems. That's a runner. Or it's somebody who's going to an unhealthy coping mechanism to try to cover it up. So they are the one who's closet drinking every night or coming home and just binge watching forever and just to escape. That's the more they escape kind of runner side of it. I think of a running shoe as a good way to kind of exemplify that, or a mask, like a mask you're literally putting on. And then that third one is a freezer. And the freezer is like an ice cube, or sometimes we can think of it as like when we're on that spin cycle in the dryer. It's exactly what you just said. It's feeling like I have no idea. I'm paralyzed. I'm the deer in the headlights. I don't even know what to do here because it's so overwhelming. That was me in that story I tell in the book. I just could not even speak. I was so overwhelmed, and we just are frozen in that state. The last one is the pleaser, or fawn is technically what it's called in scientific circles. But the pleaser is that person who is trying to do whatever it takes to keep everything calm and make other people happy. So a great metaphor for that is the trash compactor. So if you take a trash compactor and they're compacting everything down, like, I'm just going to sit here and keep pushing down and to look pretty and nice and organized, but really it's all kind of chaos inside. That is a trash compactor, and that's that pleaser or fawn final mode. And this is where people pleasing lives, of course. So again, like we said, we can have those reactions as just how we're wired personality wise. Maybe it's a response from growing up. If you, for example, growing up had a lot of anger in your home and you found that you just shut down as a child, then that was your response, then that could be something that's just how it was ingrained in you, or it's just a situation by situation thing. So it's interesting
yeah.
to see it. And I think it really is helpful in relationships, because once you understand that, you can see why the other person that you're in relationship with, say a husband or even a child, you can see why they tend to react the way they do. Maybe you want them to explode and to have a reaction, and they're just frozen. And you're like, why don't you say
Mhm.
anything? And you're like, well, this is just how they're wired. Or opposite, they are just exploding. And you're like, can you just take a time to sit here a second? Or maybe they're running away from it. It's so interesting to see that they're not desirable. We don't want them to be how we respond per se in these extreme ways, but they're understandable as to how we're wired as humans to be a way to cope with what we're seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, and it just makes so much sense because I would listen to Dave Ramsey and he would
Mhm.
explain situations like somebody would call in and they're like, we're in a really hard financial situation and my husband, he's just like stress paralyzed. Like he needs to go to work, but he's so overwhelmed, he doesn't know where to start and he literally is like just escaping, like scrolling on his phone all the time. He's stress paralyzed. And then there's somebody like Dave himself. He's like a fighter. He's like, dude, just get up and go do. Like things need to
Yes.
get done. And it just like makes sense as you're explaining it. He's like a fighter. He's like, okay, we have this situation. We're just gonna figure this out and we'll do whatever needs to be done. And someone in the same exact situation is like, I am just so stress paralyzed. I literally like do not know what to do. I'm like
Yes.
frozen and like everything just feels like too much and too overwhelming. Same circumstances, completely
Right.
different responses. And then if we're looking at our husband, let's say he's the guy that's stress paralyzed, and we're feeling super frustrated and angry with him because we're like, dude, you're not doing anything. Well,
Right.
now it makes sense now that we're learning about, different responses. And
Mhm.
instead of being frustrated and angry, you can get curious and be like, okay, how can I support you? I know this is really hard.
I think what's interesting about that is that both of those situations, whether you're the exploder, the firecracker, or the ice cube kind of person, both of those people are processing what they're feeling, but it's coming out in a different way. Like if your
Mhm.
husband is sitting there stress paralyzed, it's not that he isn't necessarily dealing with it. He's probably just dealing with it all inside versus somebody who's spewing it out. They're getting it out and they're dealing with it in that way. Or it's like we're all dealing with it, but it's not necessarily healthy in how it's coming out. If that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so I think it's so helpful just to know these ways. It's so
Mhm.
helpful in relationships to see how our husbands handle things or how we handle things or how
Yes.
our kids handle things and teaching them tools, especially our children,
Yeah.
instead of just being triggered and angry. Well, why aren't you doing this the way that I'm doing it? And so
Yes.
that just makes a lot of sense.
I love it.
So,
Yeah.
one of the things that you teach in your book is that we need to learn how to calm our mind and body in a practical ways
Yeah.
before we can figure out what we feel and why we feel it and what we can do moving forward. And the
Right.
reason is when we are emotionally flooded is the thinking part of our brain is offline. And so the amygdala takes over. I call it the feeling brain. It takes over. And so we cannot think clearly. We're just acting on emotions.
Right.
And we first need to calm our mind and body. And I want you to share a little bit about that and give us a few practical ways to calm our mind and body because there's a difference between I feel angry and I need to release that anger in a physical, intense way,
Yeah.
or I just feel emotionally flooded, feeling super overwhelmed, super overstimulated. Everything feels like too much. There's a different way to calm the mind and body in that
Yeah.
way. And I think that's what you talk about in that chapter of the book. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that before we move on to the ADD method.
Yes. This is a perfect example of why it's more than just saying pray about it or be different when you're feeling an emotion. If we can understand the concept of what you just reiterated, that when we have an emotional reaction, our logical mind is turned off. The logical mind that is saying, Jesus would not want me to respond this way. Jesus wants me to, the truth of in your anger, don't sin, all of that, that is real. We still need to obey. But the recognition that my logical brain is, for the most part, like I think it's like 70 to 80% turned off, it makes sense why I'm responding. So if we have that and know that's happening, and if we know I also have been given the power by God to take control over my body and to be able to switch from that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system mode to the parasympathetic system where my logical brain is back on again, I know that there are certain things I can do that. That is part of getting in line with being able to obey God and follow him. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's why that knowledge about our body is so critical, more than just over spiritualizing it, like you said. So we have that gift. We have the ability to understand when we are feeling like we're just completely triggered, again, a normal response to these emotions and things that happen in our world. Before we can even use a tool like ADD, which is a logical tool, we have to be able to switch our body, as we're feeling so flooded by our emotions, switch our body to the parasympathetic nervous system side, the rest and digest, logical mind turned on side. There are lots of ways to do that. If the easiest way to do that is to think of it from the four parts of self. So if we think about it from our physical body, our our thoughts, our mental, our spiritual, and just kind of all those different areas, our senses, how can our senses affect some of these things? When we can do that and we can welcome that in, then we're able to switch that side of our body on. So You mentioned that sometimes you just want to you have all this anger that you want to get out, and sometimes you feel like you need to go in. So I think a great distinction, we could go name some different things to do, but a great distinction from the beginning is to think, do I need to let this come out, or do I need to let this do I need to come inward and bring comfort to myself? Because sometimes we just need to go walk it out, run it out, go punch a pillow, get the energy out of our body. We need to just pray and just like, God, blah, 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 all these things. And then sometimes we need to feel that warmth, that compassion, that hug from God, we need to sit with a blanket over us and just feel comforted. We need to drink some hot tea to calm ourselves down. We need to go outside and take some deep breaths. We need to be in nature for a minute. What is that energy feeling like it needs to be able to switch over? And both of those can switch us into the parasympathetic. It's just having that knowledge and being able to notice in yourself what that is so that you can do that work.
I love that. I love that you said like it needs to either externally come out or,
Yes.
calming the mind and the body. And I know that
Mm.
when I feel really frustrated about maybe a situation that I need to, because I'm an external processor. And
Yeah.
so I need to like talk about it and maybe even like move my body. When I feel like
Mhm.
really upset, like with my husband or with the kids, I will say like, hey, because my kids are older now that I can actually leave them at home for a little bit. My oldest is a teenager, be like, hey, stay home with your siblings for 10 minutes. I need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And one of
Yeah.
my favorite ways is to just walk in the neighborhood and talk to God. Literally,
Yeah.
like I'm talking to a friend and like
Yeah.
I'm moving my body. Oftentimes
Yes.
I'm crying. I am
Yes.
like talking to God, like verbally, like processing and like
Yeah.
releasing it. And then when it comes out, like the yucky stuff comes out, I'm like, okay, God, what do I need to hear? Like, tell me
Yeah.
like your perspective. And oftentimes I will listen to calming music, like once I
Mm.
kind of get it all out. So I'm just like, I incorporated a lot of the
Right.
ones that you mentioned in your
Yeah.
book, but I first need to get it out, like
Yes.
before I can start calming my nervous system, calming my mind and body when I feel like an intense feeling. When it's just like
Right.
overwhelm, I'm just
Hmm.
feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated, then I can just do a calming technique. So it just
Sure.
really depends on the situation.
Yes. No, I love that you said that. And I've been learning so much about walking lately, the power of walking, and it's so many levels how walking can be beneficial. But even as we're walking, the fact that we're using opposite parts of our body, like our left arm and our right foot, our left arm is forward, our right foot is back, and then we switch that switching with our arms and legs is doing brain work of going from the left to the right side of the brain, helping us process, which makes sense why sometimes you feel this release of creativity. It's just kind of re-engaging the brain and centering all these things. It's a great thing to do. So I love that you are doing that and you've recognized when you need to just go and get it out and when you need to go inward. And here's the thing. We first have to learn what is helpful. We have to learn these things. But then also there is that little moment right as we're feeling it where we're like, I need to act on doing what I know I need to do. And that's this discipline side of managing emotions that I don't think we talk about very often, but it's like no one else in the world but God sees what's going on in my head. And yeah, I could just be like, you know what? I don't want to go for a walk. That's a lot of work. I got to tell my kids to go watch the other kid and go, then I got to get them all settled. Like we can talk ourselves out of it. And then the next thing we know, we're just scrolling on our phone for 20 minutes and we're like, and I don't feel any better. We can find these short-term fixes to kind of deal with the stress that aren't really helpful. But we have to, as we're beginning to learn about ourselves, to say, no, I need to go for a walk. I need to get out. I need to pray right now. I need to do these things for myself to get to that place, not try to placate it with this like fast food way to try to feel better that we kind
Mhm.
of go back to. So I don't know if you've experienced that too, but that happens to me. And I
Yeah.
have to be that bigger person to be like, no, 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 we're not doing this. You need this. Let's go.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that because one of the things that I teach my clients is ask yourself the question when you start feeling those big emotions,
Mm.
what do I need right now to help
Mm,
myself feel better? Not what do I want? Because what do I want is to eat a
yes.
cookie. What I want is to scroll
Yeah.
on my phone. What I want is to buy
Yeah.
something. No, what do I need? Because
Yeah.
maybe right now I need a protein snack, right? Maybe I
Right.
need to go for a walk. Maybe I need to ask my husband for help because everything
Yeah.
feels too much and overstimulating. Like, what do I need right
Mm,
now to help myself feel better? So, yeah, thanks
yes.
for mentioning that.
Yeah.
That's a really great point. Okay,
Yeah.
so now we're going to talk about the ADD method.
Okay.
How do we biblically manage our emotions and what does that look like? So we calmed our,
Mm,
mind and body.
mhm.
Now we're back to our thinking brain. And what's next? What do we do
Yes.
next?
Yeah. So there's two parts, and this is another part that sometimes gets missed when we talk about emotions. We talk about how to calm down. I mean, maybe I think a lot of us have heard about deep breathing and going outside for a minute and things like that. And that's only half of the equation. It's great that we do those things. That puts us back to this, balance of homeostasis. But the reality is, I still had that interaction with that person. And now what do I do with all that in my head? We have to be able to process the feelings of what just happened in a way that we know what God wants us to do with this. So that's where the ADD method comes in. It is three parts. It's an acknowledge is the first step, discern, and then decide. So acknowledge, we mentioned a little bit ago. Acknowledge is extremely important. And it's a step we often skip as Christians because we've really been trained to say, well, what does God want me to do? Well, yes, God wants us to make a wise choice based on his word, but we first have to see what it is and we have to acknowledge why it's there and recognize his compassion for us in that moment. So that's what acknowledges. It's saying, it makes sense I'm feeling this way because, and understanding I'm a human, I have limits, I have boundaries, and that has been pushed. This is it's not doesn't make me bad for feeling like that. How I respond is my choice and I'm responsible for it, but it doesn't make me bad to feel this anger, this disappointment, this frustration. In fact, God has compassion for me for feeling that in a broken world. He knows that it's hard to live here and what that's like. So just recognizing it and seeing it and sitting in that a little bit, right? It's reasonable to feel this way. Okay. That's acknowledged. Then the second step is to discern. So after we have kind of opened that up and seen what's there and why it makes sense we're feeling this way, we desperately need the alignment of God's truth to help us see what within what we're feeling, what is true and what isn't true. What is a lie? What is stuff that I have just put in my head that might, well, I'm mad because my husband really doesn't listen to me. He really doesn't care. He never, he always, like these words we start putting in there that can fuel the emotion, but aren't true, but they feel true. So we need God's clarity to be able to say, is that really true? Or is that triggering this whole thing from your past or this whole other conversation you had? And what does my truth say about this, about who you are, about what you need to believe, about this other person, how you need to show up? So using his truth to guide us through that. And then the last step is to decide. So we've seen why it's plausible. We've seen what's true and not true. The next step is to say, God, what do you want me to do with this? How do you want me to respond? I want to honor you. I want to do what you want me to do. And it might just be, again, surrendering this situation of discipline about my kid to you. You've told me that if I continue to help my child in this way, this is what I need to do right now. I can surrender this issue with my husband or let go of this, or maybe I need to stand up and say something. Maybe this is a call for me to set a boundary in a certain situation. But what is that next best step for me? And as part of that, where do you want me to emotionally dwell? And this is a really important step because after we've processed it and we've dealt with it, we could go right back to the anxiety or to the anger or all of those things. But that's that part in Philippians 4 that says, fix your thoughts on what's true, what's right, what's pure, what's noble, what's lovely, praiseworthy. So we've gone through all of it and it's almost like there's this hole. So like now, what is that focus going to be on? What are we going to choose to think about? What are we going to choose to let our thoughts rest in this situation? That might be something as simple as I trust you, God, here. I believe that you're working. I am going to believe that you're going to provide in this situation or whatever the thing is. So those are the three steps: acknowledge, discern, and decide.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And my question is about the acknowledge, discern, dissent. How do we discern what is a truth and a lie? Because we're like, well, my husband, for example, you had a conflict with your husband. My husband isn't listening to me. He doesn't care what I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you had a conversation and you tried expressing your perspective. And
Yeah.
the fact is that he shut you down and did not. And he's like, I don't care. I don't care what you're saying. Like, this is how it's going to be. And so your mind is like, he doesn't care what I think. Maybe he was really upset and he said that in his frustration and anger, right? And so then your mind sees that as truth. So where do we go to the
Yeah.
Bible
Yeah.
to find out the truth? Because you're like,
Mm,
this is the facts. Like, my mind is truly believing, like, hey, he doesn't care what I have to say. My perspective doesn't matter. So then obviously breeds resentment, bitterness, and then
yeah.
frustration and anger.
Yeah.
And then we take it out on our kids without meaning to,
Yeah.
because we're in a yucky state with our spouse. We take it out on the
Yeah.
kids. And so,
Mm,
okay, how do I discern? Tell me, like,
mm.
what's the practical in the moment kind of like we sit down with the Lord, we open our Bible, walk me through how to discern.
Yeah. Well, like you alluded to, discern starts first with God's word. It absolutely starts with what has God said about this? What has God said about me? What has God said about who he is as a person, his character? But when it comes down to these situations in relationships where it's like, I feel like he doesn't care, he's not listening to me, we have to sit with the Lord and ask him, what is going on in my relationship right now? What is the truth? It might be that my husband is closed off to this idea. It might be that I am projecting that he's closed off, but he's not really, because he was angry in the moment. So the truth is, I don't know what the truth is. I need you to show me what that is and to help me. And maybe it's the next step then would be, I need to have a conversation with my husband to say, when you said this, I felt like you were saying you weren't listening to me at all. Is that really what you're feeling about this? Because I need to understand what I'm supposed to do with that.
Mhm.
So I think we need to, sometimes it's a further conversation that needs to happen, but truth always starts with what God's word says, but peeling apart what might be other things that are attached to
Mhm.
it that are there. Like, maybe it's, I don't feel seen or I don't feel heard. Well, there might be some baggage where you didn't feel seen and heard as a child. And so that's
Mhm.
playing into this, where it's not really what your husband is saying, but that's playing into this. And so you have to have that awareness.
Mhm.
So there's so many layers and different computations of what that
Yeah.
could be. But I would say just asking God, is this me? Like, is this really what the situation is? Because if it is, then I need to figure out how to deal with that. That's
Mhm.
a different way of different thing to look at. Or is it me projecting other things on it that are lies? Is it me once again feeling like, okay, I have some expectations that are unrealistic about this, and that's really my issue, not his issue. So it's asking God for help figuring some of that out. And it's messy.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think
Yeah.
the other thing that I teach my clients is like finding out what your role is in
Yeah.
the situation. Because sometimes we're like, well, he didn't, he made me, all these
Mhm.
things. Well, what is your responsibility? Let's say go
Yeah.
back to that conversation we had, an intense conversation with our spouse. Well, is there something that I said was
Yes.
unhelpful? Is there a
Yes.
tone that I used, an
Right.
attitude that came out from me? Yes, he's responsible for his, thoughts, words, and actions, but where
Yeah.
can I take responsibility for
Right.
something that I said that was unhelpful, passive aggressive comment, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be? And maybe
Right.
you did handle everything well in a God honoring way. Then you say, Lord, reveal to me, like,
Mhm.
about the circumstance, how can, like, what the truth is. Maybe the truth is that my husband doesn't know how to deal with emotions well. And
Yes.
that's why he's saying what he does, because he feels so triggered because he was never modeled or taught how to deal
Yeah.
with feelings. And we'll go back to that, fighter, runner, freezer, pleaser,
Mhm.
right? Like, that's he's doing the best that he can to what he knows how to do, and show me what the truth is in the situation and how I
Yeah.
can, what is the next best step forward.
Yes. I would love to respond to that because I think we have to take responsibility for how we act and what we can do about it. So it might be the reality that my husband is not able to really process this. He doesn't really understand this. And that's the truth. There's nothing really getting around that. That's the truth. So if that's the truth, that's hard to accept. We can and acknowledge that with God that that's not cool. I don't really like that. But the reality is I'm still called to be his wife. I'm still called to love him. And so God, the prayer then becomes, God, help me to love him even though I have a really hard time accepting this in him. I'm still called to be faithful. In other words, what is my responsibility, using that word again, what is my responsibility to respond to this, even if it's something that it's a truth that I don't like or is hard for me to swallow? What's my responsibility? Because that is the only place to find peace. Trying to control what he's going to do isn't going to help it, but being able to say, this is what you want me to do. Give me the ability to do that. And that's where the last step of decide, we have to tap into God's courage, because often the decision to follow God is not what we would naturally do. It takes a lot of courage to say, I still am going to love him, even though he doesn't have the capacity to understand me here and he's closed off.
So hard.
It's so
You
hard.
can't do it by yourself.
No,
That's where, like, you need
no.
God, like
Yes.
his supernatural power,
Yeah.
because everything inside of you screams like he doesn't deserve this.
Yeah. No.
Treating me this way, XYZ, he is
Right.
shutting me down, and you just want to react in
Yes.
angry, hurtful ways because you feel hurt. And
Yes.
the only way you can still set boundaries and communicate and learn how to communicate better and all the things. We're not talking about like abusive situations. We're just talking
Of
about like,
course. Yes.
husband wife conflict that happens oftentimes, right?
Right.
But this is where it comes in. Like, you can only, okay, there's a lot of people that teach all this stuff, emotional regulation, communication, that without God, like, right? Like, and you
Mm.
can learn a lot of great skills and you will still hit a wall.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
only go so far
Hmm.
without
Right.
God. And then you're like, I'm still stuck. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like I'm doing all the right things and I'm not like getting the result that I want, or I'm not handling things in the way that I could handle, because you're doing everything with
Mhm.
your own willpower and your own strength. And you can't
Yeah.
respond in a God honoring way without the Lord. You need
Yes.
God to help you through that.
Right. And as you're going through that, you need the compassion. You need to acknowledge to him, I don't like this. Why is he like this? This is very hurtful for me to feel this. And so it is grieving that. It is seeing that. It's not just making ourselves, well, I'm just going to be like this. Yeah, God may be calling you to act this way, but there's that in between step where he's like, I'm going to hold you through this. I know this is hard for you. I know this is painful. I know it triggers this from your past. I get it. I get it. I'm asking you to make this step forward and to do this. I'm going to help you, give you the courage to do it, but I'm also going to hold you and have compassion for you in it. So it really, this whole emotional process is about strengthening our walk with the Lord. That really what it comes down to, these invitations every day to get to know him better, to bring him into our marriage, to make the right choices, to not let bitterness take root. It's so important, but you can see how it all just kind of flows back into this process of acknowledge, discern, decide, going back into that over and over
Mm.
to keep the communication going with God to help us through this.
Yeah, yes, I love that. And one of my clients, she'll tell me this is so hard,
Mm,
responding in a godly way when you just want to
yes.
react and say something hurtful. And I tell her, I'm like, it feels hard because it is hard.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because it
It's
is
okay to
hard.
say that it's hard.
It
Yeah.
is hard. And
Yeah.
the only way we can, and I told her, I'm like, this is not just like, oh, a practical tools and all these things. This is a spiritual battle. Like, the
Yes.
enemy is at war.
Yes.
He wants to do everything he can in his power to destroy your marriage.
Yes.
to breed that resentment, bitterness, and anger, say those hurtful things that are
Mm,
snarky and unhelpful. Like, yes, there's our part and our role that we are playing. And when it comes to managing, discerning our emotions and surrendering to God, and it's like a spiritual battle. Like the
yes.
enemy, his thing is to attack our
Yes.
mind. If he can get our
Yes.
mind and get us to believe lies
Right.
about other people, about God, about, you know,
Mm,
yeah, like pretty much other people and God, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then that, like, because your thoughts produce your feelings and your
Yeah.
feelings produce your actions, right? And so if
Mhm.
you're thinking negative things, you're going to feel negative things and then you're going to act out in negative ways
Yeah.
versus what is the truth? What is the God saying about what is the truth about situation? Then you feel compassion, understanding, or empowering emotions, more calm, more peace, whatever it might be. And then
Yeah.
you're handling it in a much better way, in a God honoring way.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. It is a
Oh,
battle. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because we sometimes think that it's us being bad or us making a wrong choice. And it is us making wrong choices, but we are led by a tempter to make those wrong choices. And we live in a fallen world that has lots of opportunities to choose the wrong choice. So we always need to be aware of our enemy's schemes. And if there are certain things that he brings up repeatedly as a way to add division in our relationships, we need to learn to become aware of that. That, yeah, no, you try to do this all the time, and I'm not going to fall for it. I'm not going to step into that trap again, you know?
yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you one last question, which has
Sure.
to do with what we just talked about.
Okay.
So, about the negative thoughts in our
Mhm.
mind. You talk about the inner critic in your
Mhm.
book.
Mhm.
Are those negative thoughts that we believe? So, are those our own negative thoughts or are those the voice of the enemy?
Mm. I think it could be either. I don't know if there is a true answer. I've been asked this before, and I always think we are sinful creatures. We have thoughts that are not perfectly in line with God. And yet we also know that we have an enemy who has demons and minions around all the time to try to influence us. So without being on either extreme of saying, well, that's the devil whispering in your ear, or saying it's all me and there's no responsibility for what's happening in the spiritual realm, I like to just focus on the fact that, is this thought true or not? Versus
Mm-hmm.
where is it coming from? Is it coming from me or the devil or whatever? We can get all caught up in that. And that's not really the point. The point is that it's not true and we don't need to believe it and we don't need to go there. We
Mm-hmm.
don't need to sit in that. So I think that if we focus more on that, we need to deal with it either way. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter how the mess is there or what's causing it. Let's deal with the mess that's there.
Yeah, I like that answer because sometimes my clients ask me that too. And I'm like, it can be both.
Yeah,
Some of
right.
it is just
Yeah.
thoughts that we have and
Yeah.
beliefs that we develop from when we were young and growing up, or
Yes.
like the things that our parents said, and that becomes our inner voice. And some of
Right.
it is lies from the enemy, and
Yes.
it just like feeds that, right? And then
Right.
it just like grows and grows because our mind, we have a lot of negative thoughts. I think it's
Mhm.
like either 80 or 90% of our thoughts are
I
negative,
think it's
which is
80%.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then 90 of them are repetitive, like over and over again.
Yeah.
So you have to
Yeah.
intentionally
Yeah.
like question them. Is this
Yes.
the truth? And
Right.
like redirect them to the truth is blank. And this is what
Yes.
the Bible says. And so, wow, this was such a great conversation.
Yes.
Like we
Thank
could
you. It
keep on
was
going and
great.
talking and talking. This is so good. This is going to be so helpful for so
Mhm.
many moms.
Yeah.
So tell us where we can find you, like your podcast, and then tell us where we can purchase your book too.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I'm really glad we had this conversation. I feel like you and I are very similar in wanting practical tools. Like, don't just tell me to pray about it. Let's talk about how to do this. Let's talk about the science. I love that you asked some really in-depth, deep questions about this. So thank you for what you brought up in today's conversation too. I would love to continue this conversation with anyone listening. I really do enjoy having conversations with people, asking them where they're at, what could be causing that. The best way to do any kind of a connection with me is to go to my website. It's aliciamichelle.com, and that's ALICIAMICHELLE.com. You'll find all kinds of resources there. I do have some free things. You'll find info about the podcast, which is on all the podcast players, but it's called The Christian Mindset Coach. And I would love to connect with you there more. You can also learn more about ADD in my book, Emotional Confidence. And like I said, we have a club that is, it's by invite only, but as we have conversations with people, we can say, hey, are you a fit for this? But that's a place where we take these principles that we're talking about and we teach you specific tools to walk through the relationship situations that we all face. How do I do this in the real world? How do I not just read a book or listen to a podcast? How do I do this in the real world? So again, you can find out about all of that at aliciamichelle.com.
Thank you. And we'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. It was an honor.
Thank you. It was an honor to talk to you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview just as much as I did. This conversation was so good. All the links to connect with Alicia, her book, her website, her podcast, her Instagram handle is in the show notes. I would love for you to go check out her podcast. It's absolutely amazing. So my friends, thank you for listening to this podcast episode, and I'm so glad that you got to tune in today. Hey mama, do you find yourself snapping over the smallest things, like spilled milk or constant whining, then feeling horrible afterwards? If you're tired of losing your temper and you want to show up with more patience, I have something for you. It's a free training called How to Be More Patient with Your Kids so you're not screaming over spilled milk. Inside, I'll walk you through 10 simple things you can start doing today to become a calmer, more Christ-like mom, even on the hard days. To get it for free, just leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and send a screenshot to hello@emotionallyhealthylegacy.com. Or if you'd rather skip the wait, you can grab it right now for just $27. The link is in the show notes. Let's help you become the peaceful, patient mom your kids need.